My name is Erin Convery. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager with the Transportation Department, joined by Tasha Johnson, our Assistant Director of Public Works. I'm going to start our presentation tonight by giving a brief overview of the bond as a whole, and then sharing some information about the new sidewalks portion of the Streets and Sidewalks Bond. And then Tasha's going to cover street maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, and unpaved roads. So this slide here is showing you an overview. As John alluded to, there are two bonds that are being put on the ballot this fall. One is an $85 million bond for Parks and Rec that's focused on the former Wheels Fun Park and East End and Long Meadow Park. We are not going to take a deep dive into those here tonight, but I did want to share that that is something that will be on the ballot this fall. That's for a total of $85 million for those two park projects. What we are going to focus on tonight is the second bond that will be on the ballot in the fall, which is focused on streets and sidewalks. So you can see here, there's a couple different pots of money within that. Overall, $115 million for streets and sidewalks. That includes $60 million for new sidewalk projects, $30 million for street paving and maintenance, $15 million for sidewalk repairs, and then finally $10 million for unpaved roads. So again, bringing that to a total of $115 million for streets and sidewalks. So when we take a look at the new sidewalks, I'll start with just a little bit of an overview of kind of where, we lost it. Well, I can talk through this without the slide. While John gets reconnected. So when we talk about new sidewalks, within the Transportation Department, we work on planning and identifying funding for new sidewalks, essentially sidewalks where sidewalks do not currently exist. We get those through early stages and then pass them on to our Public Works Department, primarily for construction, project delivery, and then ultimately maintenance as well. So that's a little bit of background on where transportation plugs into this on the new sidewalk side of things, and then again, where Tasha will talk more about that maintenance piece. So $60 million of the Streets and Sidewalks Bond has been identified for funding that would essentially expedite new sidewalk projects that we have in the project delivery pipeline. So I mentioned the Transportation Department goes through planning processes to identify priority sidewalk projects. We identify funding for those and then move those forward. And we consistently have several projects going through that process and into design. And so these 11 projects are projects that are at the highest stage of project readiness. And so what we mean when we say that is there's the planning, the funding, design, right-of-way acquisition, and then ultimately construction. And those are kind of some of the steps that take a project the whole way through. These projects are all in the right-of-way acquisition phase. So that means they are all actively being worked on where folks in our General Service Department, supported sometimes by outside consultant staff, are engaging with property owners to negotiate for the property we need to build that sidewalk. So these 11 projects are all in that right-of-way acquisition phase, meaning that the next step, once that is complete, would be construction. So when I say 11 sidewalk projects, what does that entail? You'll see a couple numbers here. So 11 sidewalk projects, that includes 25 distinct sidewalk corridors or gaps, so 25 different roadway segments that would be getting new sidewalk. We bundle those segments into projects for things like economy of scale, getting them through that pipeline process. So that 11 includes 25 segments, and that comes out to about 12.4 miles of sidewalk total that would be included in this bond package. I do want to take a minute here to talk about kind of some of the range of projects you might see in those 25 different segments. Some of these are short sidewalk, what we call gaps, where maybe there's 500 feet or so where you've got a sidewalk, it drops off and picks up again, and we're looking to fill that gap. There are other projects on this list that are looking at a much longer corridor. It can include things like moving curb and gutter. Some of these are wider 10-foot paths. So really a wide range is falling under this umbrella of the new sidewalks that are included in the bond package. I won't go into too many details on the specifics of which sidewalks are included just for the sake of time, but if there are questions about them during the Q&A, I'm happy to answer them. But you can see the map here that highlights which segments we're looking at in the bond. And so as far as how we honed in on this segment of our sidewalk project delivery pipeline and the dollar amount, like I said, we identified those projects that were at the furthest stage of project readiness and looked at, and with updated cost estimates, we're looking at about a $62 million difference between funding we already have through federal funding grants, local CIP grant, or local CIP funding, which, as John mentioned, is our capital improvement program, so that's approved through City Council. So all of these projects have some funding allocated to them already, but we went through a big exercise to update all of our cost estimates, and we have identified a need for additional funding for all of these projects. So these cost estimates include not just the pouring of the concrete to make a sidewalk. What we're looking at here is the cost of acquiring right-of-way, also the cost for support services to help the city acquire right-of-way. We're also looking at things like construction project management, and then the transportation sector, similar to many other sectors, has seen a huge amount of inflation over the past couple years and increasing costs of construction. So these cost estimates capture some of those recent values we've seen when we've gone out to bid for sidewalk projects. You'll notice, just I'll point out, we identified a $62 million shortfall need. The final bond number is $60 million. That was working with finance to kind of figure out what number made sense on the finances side of things. So transportation staff will be working to identify other funding through things like sidewalk and loop fees, EGI, equitable and green infrastructure, other funding sources to cover that and ensure that we have all of these projects fully funded. So that's a high-level overview of what we're looking at for the new sidewalk portion of the bond. I will also provide the 11 sidewalk projects we talked about with the bond are not comprehensive to the work that we're doing on the infrastructure side of things and transportation. As John mentioned, there's also projects that are funded outside of the bond through what's called our capital improvement program. And so this slide is just sharing some of the projects, or all of the projects through the transportation department that were funded for this upcoming year's, or this year's July 2024 through June 2025 CIP. So I've got some kind of high-level categories here. The first one I'll touch on is some of our sidewalk and trail projects. So you'll see a project here called New Sidewalks. That is where projects kind of get into that sidewalk pipeline I was talking about. So this, in this year's CIP, we have funding to continue design and moving forward with some of the projects that are earlier on in that project development phase in design and not yet to right-of-way per se. We also received additional funding for the Durham Rail Trail, which I imagine a lot of you are familiar with. That project is also in design and continues to move through that project delivery process. We have a couple projects that are focused on what I'll call roadway reconfigurations. So one of those, which I know Bike Durham has been very involved in, is the two-way conversion of Roxborough and Mangum Street. So this past year, through some funding for multimodal resurfacings, we worked through some conceptual and initial analysis on the potential conversion of Roxborough and Mangum Street. In this year's CIP, we have funding to take that into full design. We also, once again, have funding for what we call multimodal improvements and resurfacing projects. So that is when NCDOT or Public Works is resurfacing a roadway, we're able to bring on engineers to help design different pavement markings. When the roadway is repaved, we have the opportunity to restripe things like bike lanes, crosswalks, etc. And so we've been requesting funding for that on an annual basis so that we are prepared when those resurfacing opportunities come about to be able to bring consultant staff support on to help move those designs forward, especially since those are such a quick turnaround. And then the last one, we have also received funding for looking at a road diet on Guest Road as well. Another bucket is intersection and crossing improvements. So we've got a couple different distinct projects in this area. One is focused on school zone and trail crossing improvements. Those can include things like the photos you see here, RFBs, rapid rectangular flashing beacons, crosswalks, things like that that can help folks cross more safely at trails or for kids to cross the street more safely at their schools. There's also a couple locations that have been identified for new traffic signals. There's funding to continue work on a roundabout at Maureen Road and American Drive. And then lastly, we have funding this year for some Vision Zero safety initiatives. So again, I know Bike Durham was very involved in helping bring a Vision Zero coordinator on board this past year. Lauren, our Vision Zero coordinator, is working on our Vision Zero action plan. But in the meantime, we were able to request funding for this year's CIP that we'll be able to put towards some of the safety improvement projects that NCDOT has going on as local match at some of the intersections throughout Durham. We've got a couple projects that are focused on on-street bike facilities. So you may have seen around town, our first phase of neighborhood bike routes has been installed. That's included signage and pavement marking and some neighborhood traffic circles on some of our neighborhood streets to help folks navigate their neighborhoods on foot or by bike. We have funding to move into design for a second phase of neighborhood bike routes that will be on other streets throughout the city. And then we also have funding for adding vertical protection to bike lanes. This year's funding is going to be focused on the bike lanes on MLK, knowing that that's a higher speed roadway. We're bringing a design team on board to help work on designs kind of above and beyond the typical flex posts that you see out on the streets now. And then lastly, I'll mention we also do have some operational improvements focused on signal timing, so did receive some funding for that this year as well. So that's a very, very quick overview of what we've got going on in the bond and CIP, and I will pass it to Tasha to talk about the street maintenance part of this.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. So good evening. Again, Tasha Johnson, Public Works Assistant Director. We work very closely with transportation, as Aaron mentioned, to deliver quite a few of the new sidewalk construction projects. But in addition to that, we do a lot of other work as well. A big portion of the work we do is currently geared towards paving, pavement repair, sidewalk repair, and bridge maintenance. We have 3 distinct asset management programs that we've managed to stand up in the last few years, and we are very proud of that work and moving the city forward in terms of being a little more preventive in how we maintain our network. The city of Durham currently has almost 800 miles of asphalt streets. That number continues to grow annually. We've seen that number increase as much as 5% in a year, but we're averaging about 1 to 2% of growth per year just in miles of streets. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but in the last 10 years, the network has grown by over 80 miles. So we are growing and we are growing fast. And As those streets come online, we have to figure out how to maintain them. Part of our asset management program is based upon routine pavement condition surveys. The last survey was conducted in 2011, and at that time, it was determined that our average pavement condition index, or PCI score, was 69. 69 is not bad per se, but if I brought a 69 home to my mom, she may not be as happy. So we are trying to increase that number incrementally. We don't have a specific target, but any incremental increase will show marked improvement over the entire network. And the PCI study showed us that we need about $20 to $25 million per year to do that. So the money that we're receiving through the bond program, or we anticipate receiving, will help us advance that work, but it will do little to eradicate the need. At a minimum, we're going to need anywhere from 15 to 20 million annually just to maintain the network in its current condition. So with the 30 million that we anticipate receiving through the bond program, we anticipate doing 100 miles, give or take, of roadway improvements. You can see a combination of treatment types below that go beyond just the typical resurfacing work. Over the last 6 years, we have established a pavement preservation program. And what that means is that we use a combination of treatment types to keep the pavement in good condition. And you can do so at a much lower price than waiting for it to deteriorate to the point of needing full repaving. So with the bond work, you will also continue to see a combination of treatment types. So that could be microsurfacing, which is just a thin layer of emulsion applied to the street to help seal cracks and provide a little bit of structure, just a little bit. You can see crack sealing. You can see on the far right a rejuvenator, which helps to maintain the condition of the pavement to keep it from cracking, and it helps to extend the life incrementally over years. I don't have a slide here that shows what the charts look like, but we have been able to hold the PCI at 69 for quite a few years, even with consistent underfunding. But we are seeing roads deteriorate well beyond the point of being able to be addressed by those treatments. And so the bond funds will go a long way towards catching those up and get them into the preservation treatment cycle. Sidewalk repair, we also do. That network is not growing quite as fast as the miles of streets, but that network is growing as well. We have over 650 miles of sidewalks that we maintain, and those are just the publicly maintained sidewalks that are in the roadway right away. So we don't maintain anything in the parks or in shopping centers or private areas, just those sidewalks in the right of way. In 2021 as well, we did a study and determined that there were $80 million of repair needs, backlog needs that were unaddressed. So the funds that we receive with the bond work will go a long way towards addressing some of those repair needs. And I need to point out now that the $15 million will not do 100 miles. That's an error. There's a start by it because we were still refining that number this morning when we sent the presentation out to John. But that number is closer to 20 miles. So it's a little bit off, but we are very confident at this point that we could do 20 miles of sidewalk repair with $15 million. Similar to pavement preservation, we will use a combination of treatment types, not as extensive, but not everything will be a remove and replace. Where we can, we would do some sidewalk sawing or grinding. You might see little corners clipped off, which is way cheaper than pulling up a whole panel and replacing continuously throughout the whole system. Similar to our pavement repair, sidewalk is also prioritized through an equity lens. The PCI study, as well as the sidewalk condition study, established a methodology to prioritize the work with an equity lens. And so with the sidewalk repair, we are able to focus the funds in the area of the community where people are most dependent on sidewalk as a mode of transportation. So The locations we've kind of identified, but we're refining that now that we have more clarity around the number of miles we'll be able to address, and that information will be made available on the bond webpage. Unpaved roads is the last pocket of money that we anticipate receiving with this infrastructure bond. So in 2019, we were directed by council to pave all remaining unpaved roads in the city. There were a lot. It was over 179 individual street segments that were scattered throughout the city. It only totaled 19 miles, but it was nearly 200 street segments. So over the last 5 years, we've been slowly chipping away at that, and we've gotten it down to 11 miles. Not all of that was done by the city. Some of it was done by private developers going in ahead of us and repaving the roads as well. This amount of money will only pave the roads, so we're not going to build them. We're going to brush off any loose material, fix any soft spots if there are any, and pave it. So we're not going to do curb and gutter. We're not going to realign the roads. We're not going to widen the roads. There will be no ditch work, utility relocation, none of that. We're just going to pave it. Because to build a road is far more expensive. I think our estimate at the time was close to $200 million to build them versus $12 million to pave them. So that's what we anticipate doing with the $10 billion for unpaved roads. So we have a project ongoing. We did receive funding in FY24, and that work is being completed this summer. We received funds for FY25, and those funds will be combined with the bond funds to repair or to pave all remaining unpaved roads. And lastly, similar to transportation, we also do a lot of other stuff. So a high-level overview of our FY25 CIP projects. These funds were allocated July 1 of 2024 this year. And so we are starting to encumber those within projects at the same time that we are working to identify potential bond projects. So we have a lot of work going on in my department at this time. As I said before, our annual need is 20 to 25 million. We received 13 with FY25 funds. And so we are working to identify those locations and flesh out the scope of work that will be needed. And also we will update our pavement condition study this fall. So it won't be done in time to fully inform the bond work, but we do hope to have enough of it done to have influence and make sure that we are focusing in the right areas of the city. Our second CIP allocation for FY25 was sidewalk repair. Our annual need is $10 million. I think we received $2 million FY25. So we are identifying that, and we have not decided yet if we're going to do a separate project. No, I think what we're going to do is amend an existing project to keep that work moving and keep it separate from the bond work. But another annual project that we deliver. Ardmore Drive is a road improvement project. We'll be extending water line and providing access to water and sewer services for a section of Ardmore Drive. Ardmore Drive would have been a road that would be paved under the Unpaved Roads Program, but it is now separately funded by this project. And the remaining portion, which will be another 1,000 feet roughly, will then be paved under the Unpaved Roads Program. It gets a little confusing with money in different pots. Pedestrian bridge repair. So historically, our General Services Department has maintained bridges throughout the city. We found almost 100 of them in parks, on trails, and in other places. And doing basic repair is great, but to our knowledge, no structural assessment had been done of the entire network, and so we took it upon ourselves to complete that last year. And we found a need for several bridges that was fairly immediate, to the point of having to close down a few. We received just a little over $3 million in FY25 to address those bridges and continue that program. 3.05 million was the FY25 allocation, and that work is currently being, the construction contract is being prepared, the manual, and getting ready for advertisement. Unpaved roads, we did receive funds, the fifth-year funding, and that was $1.2 million. And like I said, that work will move forward independently of the bond projects. Lastly, we are also responsible for a big pot of money. Water and sewer extensions is the umbrella that we call it, but under that pot of money, a lot of things happen. When NCDOT, for example, comes in and does work like the Austin Avenue project, or repairs a bridge somewhere, or widens an intersection, there may or may not be a utility in the ground that's in the way of that work. And so we have to enter into an agreement with NCDOT to design and relocate that utility if necessary, because we don't have the staff capacity to do it on their timeline. And so those agreements cost money, and those agreements are funded by this work. In addition to that, when water and sewer repairs are done around the city, or when the Department of Water Management establishes a new service for a resident, there's a utility cut. It may impact the asphalt, it may impact the sidewalk, it may impact both. Funds are now, we used to do that work with our city staff, but there's just so much that we're not able to keep up, and it was a significant backlog. So funds from this pot also fund that scope of work. Between these two, water and sewer, we received about $9 million in the FY25 budget to manage those scopes of work. And so that is just a high level of what we do, in addition to the new sidewalk construction, the bond work for sidewalk repair, for paving, as well as the unpaved roads program. And I think that is it. We do have a link here for the city's bond webpage that can answer quite a few questions. And also, if there's a desire to have staff come to another meeting besides this, there's a button on the webpage that we are encouraging people to use so that communications can help make sure we have the right people in place for those meetings, if you would like to talk to us again. So we'll take questions now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to make sure to moderate the questions. When you ask a question, if you wouldn't mind, please standing up and stating your question loudly. I'm going to repeat it and look into our camera so we have it for posterity. Who wants to go first? Donna?
Since you go first, I'm good. So, Donna, Frederick, you need to stand. I can do it from here. I can do it.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay. So, my neighborhood is Ragtown. And of course, most of us, the presentation, I think, speaks a lot clearer than the paperwork was shown in the beginning, so thank you for that. Departments really good. My question is, it seems to me when you were talking about our bridges and our roads and the little bit of funding that you've been receiving over the years, it seems almost like we jumped, we're focusing on repaving, right lanes, but we have structural damage that's so old. And to me, a little bit scary, because I've drove some of them for years. And it seems like the focus should be, we want these roads safe. I mean, and then we can remark them, and then we can get the traffic moving away, and get the lights and stuff. And to me, that's the part, like, that is a lot of money that you're missing to keep the road and overpasses safe. So my question is, besides the referendum, I know you said there's other improvements, you have any funds coming. Why does that seem like that's on the back burner to me?
Okay. Donna asks, with all of the structural and the structural integrity concerns about some of the roadways and bridges here in Durham, why does it feel like the funding for addressing those issues is kind of on the back burner as opposed to some of the more surface level maintenance that we're doing?
So I don't know if I have a complete answer for you, but I will share that in addition to the nearly 800 miles of city-maintained streets throughout Durham, there is almost an equal number of NCDOT maintained roads throughout the city. A lot of the major roads, like Duke Street and I-40 and the Durham Freeway and Roxborough Road and many others, even some of the neighborhood streets are NCDOT maintained. So that I would like to think that most of the bad stuff you're seeing is there. Perhaps not. There are streets, as I mentioned, that have deteriorated beyond the point of being helped by pavement preservation. From a safety perspective, if we find a street that is past preservation, we still elevate it up to pavement repair. It just affects significantly our cost per mile overall. So where we are aware of those locations, we do try to prioritize those along with the pavement preservation work. Now, in terms of the annual funding we receive, we advocate annually for that need. But as a staff, that's about as far as I can go.
That's what I was asking, like, there's an advocacy here that's been really, really strong, and I'm just wondering, should some of that advocacy be really towards the safety of the roads? And I'm not gonna call which group it is, but I'm just saying, it needs to be more.
Thank you. Thank you. In the back, we got Eric.
Hey, Eric Lansby. This is for Aaron or potentially Bill. I've noticed that some of the streets that are part of the new sidewalk program are ones like Marine Road and Cornwall, some of these projects that have been going on for a while, and some of those also include bike lanes. So the bike lane portion of that, is that funded separately, or is that also coming out of this potential bond?
Okay. Eric wanted to know when it comes to some of the funding on roads like Marine and Cornwallis that already have bike lane infrastructure, is that funding going to be coming out of the CIP or the bond?
Sure, so the projects, the costs that we're looking at for the bond include the entirety of those different projects. So we are not breaking out costs separately. So when I mentioned earlier, some are, short sidewalk gaps. Some are, like you mentioned, include moving curb and gutter to accommodate bike lanes, building sidewalk behind curb and gutter. We're looking at the project as a whole when it's included on this list. I will mention, just to clarify though, all of these projects do have CIP, and some of them also do have federal dollars already allocated to them. So the bond would be in addition to that. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Chris, it's just going to be folks who I know their name, I guess.
Makes it easier, right? So I'm Chris. I'm kind of curious about, I think the bonds are great in terms of playing catch up, but I think the thing we kind of have to acknowledge with the bonds is that we're playing catch up. And I think this touches on some of the things you're speaking to related to funding. How much are we doing any kind of analysis about like policies and practices that we have and the ways we go about this stuff that are maybe making our costs divergent from our cities in the local area? I'm not sure if they are. And then kind of also related to this, are there things that we could be doing that would reduce those budgetary needs? To give an example, near me there's an area where there's sidewalk that's completely destroyed, and it's destroyed because cars are parked on the sidewalk. And obviously the sidewalk's not built to hold cars. So that's gonna have to get rebuilt, which means the city's gonna have to spend all this money on this. There's plenty of space for cars to park on the sidewalk, so maybe, I don't know, I think a few trees would be like a cheaper option than having to create a situation where like you guys are having to rebuild the sidewalk. So I don't know how much that conversation is happening in the city to like talk about broader policy changes and budgetary changes to sort of bring costs down and kind of be more proactive about doing these things? Because, I know you guys can't do anything about that. You're not planting trees, right? But you're having to rebuild the sidewalk now. So is there anything ongoing that will keep us from having to play catch up with big bonds in the future and kind of get onto a more even keel relative to our neighboring cities?
Yeah, so,
Do you have anything you want to say? Okay.
all right, I'll repeat it real quick. Chris wants to know that from a budget and procedural standpoint, are there any policies that we can look at over the next few years so that when it comes to protecting the investments that we've made in this infrastructure, that we're not really hiking up the cost to keep up this maintenance?
So I won't speak directly to maintenance costs per se, but I can speak to, from the policy perspective. The city actually last year conducted a sidewalk planning and delivery audit through our audit services department. And one of the, sorry, I realized the mic wasn't as close to my mouth. I hope you all could hear that. I'll repeat just in case. The city did a sidewalk delivery audit last year looking at sidewalk planning and delivery. And one of the recommendations coming out of that was more or less what you were just describing of taking a look at best practices for sidewalk planning and delivery, how that compares to what Durham's doing, and if there are process improvements we can make. So what we've done is build that into, we are getting ready to get started on an update to our previous bike walk plan, which was last done in 2017. We're getting started on an update. It'll actually be a joint update with the city and the county. And that audit task, that kind of review of peer cities, how can we incorporate best practices to improve our sidewalk delivery, including things like cost, is going to be a task within that study. So we're hoping to have recommendations from that too. I'll also mention that Bike Durham is has been doing some interviews with city staff. Joe, I think, is here. Joe has been working on a similar review, and I believe y'all will be providing some potential recommendations out of that as well. So it's something we're certainly aware of and are taking a look at.
And from the maintenance perspective, we have been, so our asset management programs are geared towards doing just that and helping to identify and be proactive and preventive in our maintenance and do it when things cost less so that we can maintain a larger portion of the network on a continual basis. So those are the major changes we've done in terms of practice internally. And we've also explored multiple treatment types, specifically for the sidewalk repair. We're doing the sidewalk sawing, the contractor likes to call it sawing, grinding, sawing, the same thing to the public. And we've incorporated that and a few other treatment types we're exploring to try to reduce the overall cost of the maintenance. Similar to the bridge programs for the pedestrian bridges, but also for the road bridges. In addition to the 98 pedestrian bridges, we also maintain 8 road bridges across the city. And so we are trying to be preventive in terms of that treatment as well, where we might go in and do some structural repair underneath as opposed to shutting down and rebuilding a whole bridge. So those are some of the things we're doing. As far as the parking on the sidewalks, the city is actually planting trees. There's a tree planting program. They're kind of small. They don't do anything to deter someone who wants to drive over them. For now, hopefully they will be allowed to get a little bigger and serve multiple purposes. But there is a current tree planting program throughout the city. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Oh, wait, we have one more question?
One more.
Please.
I haven't looked at closely at the bond. What is the, how is it being funded? Like, what is the way in which the bond is currently being funded in terms of tax?
Okay. Great question. We have a question on exactly how the bond is being funded in terms of taxes.
Aaron has a cheat sheet.
I've got my cheat sheet here. So, and I apologize, we did not have these on the slides, but this information is available on the website. So, but I'll just share So if we were looking at the streets and sidewalks bond alone, that's a 1.99 cent rate increase per $100 of assessed value. So just for reference, annually for a property valued at $300,000, that would be a $60 increase in your overall property tax, or $5 a month. For the Parks and Rec bond, which is 85 million total as a reminder, that's a 1.47 cent increase per 100 of assessed value. So that comes out to an annual cost of $44 a month for a property valued at $300,000, again, just as a reference point. And then lastly, so if you're looking at both bonds combined, if both of those were to pass, that would be a 3.46 cent rate increase per $100 of assessed value, looking at an overall increase of $104 annually on a property valued at $300,000. So again, that is up on the bond website. No need to memorize those numbers, but just as an overview.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Tasha, so much. Oh, it doesn't sound like we're done. Okay, let's keep going. Please.
Constance right now from right now also. And we have really been advocating for sidewalks on East Coast Boulevard. Been promising sidewalks on East Coast Boulevard. And I just want to know if this bond passes, because it's been pushed back. Said that if the bond passes, that sidewalk will be put in on both sides.
Correct.
What's the guarantee of that? I mean, are we, is that really gonna happen if this bond passes, or, you know, the government of the
Sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. So Constance from Bragtown asks that due to the consistent delays on the development of sidewalks on East Club Boulevard, since that's set to be included in the bond, are we actually going to see that come to fruition?
I'm happy to share that the answer to that question is yes. So East Club is actually, when I talked about project readiness earlier, East Club is up at the top of the list. It is the most ready to go. Right-of-way acquisitions are complete, so it would be ready to go to bid and move into construction, you know, with the appropriate funding in place.
I would like to ask a follow-up question, because we spent a lot of time in Brighttown with Public Works. What are the limits of that section of sidewalk? Stevenson to Glenbrook. Is that the section? Stevenson to Glenbrook? Is that the section that you're asking about? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
Both sides of the street.
On both sides?
Both sides, correct.
Thank you. And
My name is Michael. I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. Sort of related to that question, what sort of, given there's so much emphasis on PCI index and inflation, and basically every year that goes by, these projects get more expensive, what's being put into place in terms of oversight and sort of communication of progress on delivery of these projects?
Michael asked that with the importance of the PCI and the deliverance, sorry, could you repeat a little bit of it?
Yeah, sure. The PCI and inflation means that the more time that passes, the more expensive, not to mention the whole impetus of the bond, right? Like sort of everything's delayed. So what's being put in place to look at project delivery oversight to ensure that these projects are delivered, you know, on time, on budget? And are there any additional resources being brought from this new funding source?
Okay, so he asks, what things in terms of oversight are being put in place to make sure that, I'm having a tough time, I'm so sorry. Would you like to just answer it?
Sure.
Okay. Did you want?
Go for it.
So in terms of oversight, we have staff, and we have the residents who we are accountable to with that oversight. In addition to staff, we are having to contract out some project management services to have managed the day-to-day on the ground, because it is such an influx of work that will be happening at one point. So we'll have multiple layers of oversight throughout the project. In terms of how that will be shared out to the public, I don't know that we've talked about what that would look like on a forward-facing dashboard. But that is a question that I can take back and share with our communications team. You want to answer that?
Okay, one more question.
Quick question, hopefully quick answer. So from these different new sidewalk projects, small ones to large size, if the bond passes, what's the estimated timeframe, from design, conception of design to delivery and completion? And for the bigger projects with design, is there the input process?
Yeah, so a lot of the projects that would be funded by the bond are already past the design stage. So they are already in the process of where we're at the right-of-way acquisition point where property is being acquired to build those sidewalks. So to get to your first question about how quickly they would moving forward, I will say the right-of-way acquisition piece creates a bit of a question mark in some of the schedules because it depends on how property negotiations go with individual property owners. And as you can imagine, even though it's a very thin strip of sidewalk we're putting in, we often impact dozens upon dozens of properties. One thing that the bond does allow us to do, we have been working on contracting out right-of-way acquisition services. So again, similar to what Tasha was mentioning with construction project management, it just expands our capacity to do that right-of-way acquisition quicker. So that would be one benefit of having that funding available. As it stands currently, right-of-way acquisition is one of the bottlenecks we're seeing in a lot of our project delivery. As far as the community input piece, like I mentioned, these projects, many of them have been in the works for quite a while. We do have, as projects get started, there is often more opportunity for input earlier on in that design pipeline when we're looking at where are crossings needed, where are people feeling unsafe crossing the road, how can we incorporate that into our sidewalk project, things like that. Often that'll be community meetings. We also, I mentioned earlier, the bike walk plan update is getting kicked off, and that's also a really great opportunity to really provide that input really early on in the process. That helps identify priority projects. Where are we going to be putting sidewalks even before we get to the more nuanced design questions later on. So we will, as that project gets kicked off, certainly be reaching out to Bike Durham with opportunities to engage there and really help influence that planning process that ultimately helps influence which projects are put forward for funding.
So for timelines, let me first go to the sidewalk projects. We do anticipate starting construction on some of the new sidewalk projects as early as next year. But there are 11
projects, 12, 24 months.
Yeah, so there are 11 different projects. The timelines are all different and they will all start at different points along the next several years for the new sidewalk construction. For the maintenance projects, we anticipate having the list completed. So the unpaid roads list is finalized. That is what it is. We anticipate going to bid as soon as we know the status of the bond and start construction on those projects next year, next construction season. So the construction season for us is roughly March, April through November, early November, weather depending. So we anticipate starting the unpaid roads projects next construction cycle. It's possible that we could do all the work in one season, but we are putting a lot of work into the economy at one point. So we may have to stagger that over 2 construction seasons because there are a limited number of contractors currently in the market. So that's the unpaid roads. For the sidewalk repair, the start of construction will be similar. We hope to have the list of locations finalized and cleaned up and ready to bid not long after we know the outcome of the bond referendum. That work can start a little sooner. It's less dependent on the weather, but we'll just say construction season, we will start that work, and we anticipate at least 2 construction seasons just due to the volume of that work. A similar timeline we anticipate for the pavement repair. We're still finalizing that list, and we plan to advertise that and start construction next spring, but pavement is highly sensitive to the weather, and so we anticipate 2-ish pavement seasons. Opportunities for input, the unpaved roads, we're past that point, but we welcome any input that will help us as we get on the ground and start to deliver that work. For the sidewalk, we have, that work is being guided by our sidewalk study. But if there are some locations that we need to pay special attention to, we welcome that input, and we will put it on our radar, whether it's completed with these funds or other funds, similar for pavement repair. If there's a location that is not on our radar and is definitely a critical need, we will put it on our radar and figure out which pot of funds and where it ranks in terms of risk and need over the next couple of years.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thanks for joining us.